right, we are in sunny Scottsdale, day one of IntelliCon hosted by our friends at SCIP, and I am joined by a recurring guest now on the podcast.
Twice.
2 times now. Also part of the Battle Cards course. It's none other than Brad Lawless, the senior director, can't leave out the senior director of product marketing at Movista. Brad, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
This is your first IntelliCon?
Yeah.
What are you most excited for?
Meeting other professionals, I think, in the space. Being at a smaller company, one where, well, to be honest, like I've done competitive for a while, but when we first started, it was just me as a sales engineer, and so we didn't get it formalized until, well, like a year and a half ago, and learn a lot. Have learned a lot and networked with other Clue customers online, but being in person is a lot different.
It's so much different for these conversations. I don't know, just being here, talking with you, not behind the screen, makes me happy, and I can't wait for when we do customer dinner. Everything that comes with being in person, you can't describe it, but it's just a different energy.
Well, and honestly, like even the panel tomorrow, I'm looking forward to seeing what people ask and meeting people in other industries, right? Like it feels like I talk to software people all the time. But I was talking to Claire a while ago, and she said there are a few manufacturers and pharma people here, and I just want to know how do you do it differently.
So we're gonna dive into a lot in this conversation today. Before we do so, I would love to kick off this episode with you sharing 2 to 3 actionable takeaways for our listeners.
Well, hopefully we'll hit on all of them. But I would say like what I've learned in the last, again, year and a half is, not to limit competitive to, just data points on battle cards, specifically with your competitors. We've expanded almost like we're just now a research group, right? Our primary mission is competitive, but we're looking at what our actual competitors are doing. We're looking at the marketplace. We're looking at trends to help inform our product group on new features that our competitors may be looking at or maybe not, and it all lives sort of in that same place. When you have juicy competitive information, get it out to people the way they want to receive it. So we utilize the Intel Digest a lot. Our Slack channel is pretty hopping, both with us giving information out, but also creating that competitive culture within our organization, within our sales team. So a lot of times, when they hear something in a meeting, they'll drop it in there like 5 seconds later, and then we're working on getting the battle card. And the biggest thing that we're trying to do this year is really just embed competitive in the DNA of the company at all levels. We wanted to have more visibility to our C-suite. That's starting to happen. We're starting to build touch points with our customer success organization. So when renewals are coming up, we're trying to be proactive on addressing any customer questions, or if they're like, hey, but we saw this thing from this person. And we're like, yeah, but. And really just branching out from that traditional relationship that you might have with a sales and marketing team. Well,
perfect segue to my next question. We talked about a year ago, and you were a team of one, actually just around about bringing your first hire dedicated to compete. Shout out Frankie. Shout out. So the question really is, how has your priorities as a compete team evolved from a year ago to today?
Well, first of all, I would say, I know not everyone has the resources available to do it, but getting a dedicated person was critical to expanding the program. You can get by if you're a team of one, however many hours you can devote to it is fine, but it's really allowed Frankie to really dive deep, stay up to date when we see competitors shifting, but then also that focus is what's allowed us to sort of land and expand within the company.
How are you expanding?
We have weekly, so we just launched a new version of our mobile app. So we had a launch campaign involved with that. So we were bringing in all of our competitive information for how we were going to position it. We have weekly touch bases with the sales teams. We've taken over win-loss interviews, which was honestly, it was something we hadn't done super regularly because salespeople are busy. They have regular jobs. And it's the reason it's good to have an objective third party, because sometimes that person that's been talking to the salesperson feels like they've told them everything, right? You just get a new person in. We're aligned on the product side of the house as opposed to the marketing side of the house. So we're in meetings all week with our product managers and our designers when they have a question about like, hey, how does a competitor show this? And we're like, well, here you go. Here's a video or that we found, or whatever. And then again, we're starting to work more closely with our CS team.
So one thing we've talked about a lot recently with Clue customers and folks in Compete is this concept of like quantifying and closing your competitive revenue gap. How do you help tip those winnable neck and neck deals? How do you as a Compete team help tip those in your business's favor?
Sometimes you have to get creative. I think, obviously we've talked about that competitive revenue gap a lot. And once you get down selected in an RFP process, and it's, you and one other company, there are very clear differences, and then sometimes there are very small things, and sometimes it's the small things that matter. We recently had a deal where, the evaluation cycle was taking a while, and we just happened to discover that one of their main investment groups had all their money at Silicon Valley Bank. And we didn't. So we just, we gave that to the sales team. I wasn't in the meeting, but they were able, they used that information just to, again, soft depositioning on, credibility and security that we're going to be around for a while as opposed to someone else. And I think it's really, when you get to that point, any little piece of information can be the thing that clinches it for you.
From your kind of experience right now in Compete, is there something you've picked up or learned throughout sort of supporting these neck and neck deals that you now kind of apply into your work or your team's work with Frankie? Is there some, from all of these, you mentioned before we started recording that you're like, every deal's damn competitive. Like the moment
honestly,
we're tagged in.
The way everything feels very recession-y right now, like it is. Everything is. There's always a competitor there. Unfortunately, we don't always know, right? A customer won't tell us. The biggest thing is building that confidence with our sales team, so they bring us in as early as they possibly can, and we've started to see that, especially once they hear the name of a competitor. They'll go look at the boards we have in Clue. But they'll usually hit us up pretty quickly to say, have you heard anything new? Customers said they really like this feature about the competitor platform. What do we know about it? What can we do to kind of move things around? It's really just becoming an integrated part of the conversation as much as anything.
It's interesting. Clue recently just ran a research report with 300 plus revenue leaders, so director level and above. We're about to release the data soon, but one of the things that really stuck out to me as we were looking through the data was 91% are saying that between a year ago to today, deals are getting way more competitive.
It's insane. Yeah, our industry has always been competitive. I would say it's 2 or 3x.
And are those deals right on the margins? Are those deals that are kind of these, it could be us, it could be them?
Some of them, yeah. And part of it's our industry. So we're a software vendor to people who work in the retail industry. So retailers, manufacturers, the labor companies that serve both of them. Especially when you're talking to a retailer, right? Those are long sales cycles. And definitely what we've seen in this, just with the economic climate, is deals are just taking longer. Everyone's like, and our budget got cut by like this. So now what can you do? So it's, really coming in and proving value for whatever someone can afford, and then make sure that, you're still profitable. It takes a lot of intelligence to do that. Like competitive, right? To make sure that we are stacking up and have those features that someone needs. And can show the value of it so we get the price that we want as well.
It's interesting. It's like in these more difficult, tight times, like compete is almost needed more than ever. One, because there's more competition, but there's also a need to prove out value that much more to the buyer. There's more oversight on budget. Really.
Well, yeah, because customers they were always smart, but they're taking the time to really just look at everything, 5, 6, 7 times. And I think where a lot of companies may have seen compete as a nice to have, now it's essential.
On this note of these neck and neck deals, another interesting kind of data point that at least I took when we were going through the research was revenue leaders. It was 72% are confident that their sellers, their reps know their big differentiators and know their competitors' differentiators. But only 31% were really confident that they can communicate that value, that differentiated value well. There's a stark drop off between knowing but executing. So from your perspective in Compete, how do you help bridge that gap? How do you enable really to go from knowing to executing?
So I'm an English major from way back, right? So I always look at things in terms of audience and know who your audience is. And I think that works the same way internally when you're talking about compete information. We've started evolving our program. So again, because the marketplace is super tight, we have initiated a couple of very specific campaigns targeting, customers of a couple of competitors. And to help facilitate that, Frankie, again, shout out Frankie, has started building role-based battle cards. So we've got specific battle cards for our BDRs. So it's not just here's the information, it's here's how you, BDR, should communicate this information when you're doing a discovery call with a customer of one of these competitors. And it's not a script, but they're very strong talking points, potential depositioning statement should someone bring up a certain feature, and then we're just going to continue to evolve that as as we get more feedback on how it's working on those calls.
What I love about that too is there's a strategic goal in mind. It's this campaign as well. So it's like not only are we tailoring this information to you, tailoring how you can use it against these specific competitors, but it's all part of this campaign where you're focused on this as well.
And we don't have full battle cards for them yet, but I mean, we're writing up points. The things we give the BDRs are going to be slightly different than the things we give the sellers who are in face-to-face meetings, and making sure they have their specific talking points as well.
You briefly touched on it when we talked about sort of how your compete role, the priorities are sort of changing within your own team and the business. Again, referring back to some of the data, revenue leaders are mentioning in 2023, most important revenue stream right now is retention. And you touch on that a little bit. So how are you working with how are you focusing on the retention initiative from a compete standpoint today? And how are you looking ahead to really kind of achieve that?
Yeah, so working with our customer success team in a greater capacity is one of our strategic goals this year. And it is mainly around that, right? Anytime you have someone come up for a contract renewal, especially if budgets are tight, they're going to start, I would do it. I'd start looking around and going, well, can I get the same functionality or better for a cheaper price, or what's going on here? And so we're starting to get out ahead of that with our CS team. Know who's coming up for renewal in the next few months. Have they said anything? Are they maybe looking at some customers so that we can, competitors, so we can arm those customer success folks with the same information, or again, slightly tailored so they can communicate it as well. We're using some of that information as well. We have a new version of our mobile app that we just launched a month ago. And so we had a market-facing launch campaign, but now we're working with the customer success team specifically because change is scary. No one likes change. And we want to provide them with the appropriate information just to have those conversations to make sure our existing customers feel good about the technology. They're ready to move over. They know it's not going to impact their business. And in case they happen to say, oh yeah, but I saw this thing, we're going to be like, no, you're good. We got you. It's fine. And it's really just about, at the end of the day, making sure everyone understands where we sit and where our technology sits and can communicate that appropriately.
It's interesting, this sort of, as businesses focus more on retention, I think it is really important as well for compete teams to align with the business priority as well. Yeah. And this side of, traditionally speaking, from a tool, support, enablement, I'll say it, CS sometimes are under the, like, they're not prioritized compared to the sellers, the net new business. And it's going to be an interesting shift throughout the year if more and more businesses are focused on this retention and upsell, how compete teams do start to shift and focus on support, and how that is maybe a little bit different. Like, what does a renewal discussion a competitive renewal look like compared to a competitive net new deal?
Well, because there's less baseline education about your platform, right? I mean, they're an existing customer, so you don't have to go like, hey, here's, we do this, this, and this, but you want to make sure they're really keyed into what you've got coming out on the roadmap, what you've got planned, right? Because typically, for enterprise software, you're trying to renew someone for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You've got to build confidence with them that what you have planned is innovative and will continue to bring them value. And part of that is, the history they've had with the product so far, but it's also just helping to educate them on where the state of technology is going, not just in your company, but in, again, competitors, in the industry as a whole, and making sure that they believe, you're the partner they need to help grow their business as those changes happen. Because stuff's changing fast.
Real fast.
ChatGPT, man, like there's all sorts of stuff out there like that didn't exist 6 months ago, and so that takes a lot of research and a lot of communication.
You mentioned at the top of this conversation that compete isn't just a nice to have now; like it's more important than ever. On that note, how have you proven that out to your own leadership team? How have you internally proven the impact that we're not just a nice to have? We're not this like nice, fun addition. Like we are core and critical to our business's success.
Well, it's kind of comes back around what we were saying earlier, but every deal is competitive, right? And our chief revenue officer knows that. We have a new CEO that joined us a couple of months ago, and it's really been heartening to see how much they have focused on the competitive program as a whole, right? So the CEO is trying to get up to speed, right, on the marketplace and the industry. So not only getting in the existing information, but spinning off a couple of, side projects is probably the wrong term for your CEO, but, ancillary, extra, he's like, I want to learn about this. Can y'all go look? And so we peel off a couple of days and go bring back things for that. Really looking at, as an example, so as we're rolling out new features and how we're integrated, I do oversee all of product marketing, which includes pricing recommendations. But the first thing I do is go ask Frankie to please survey all of our competitors and help me figure out like where pricing is sitting there. So it feeds into everything we're doing now.
So that's really interesting in terms of like the external factors as well are kind of causing this, from your CRO to your CEO to care more than they maybe would have before. What about what your program's doing internally as well to prove out the impact from day one as well to today?
Internally, as far as like metrics, how do we know?
Yeah, either metrics or things you're taking on to kind of get that traction. Again, you mentioned off the top, like building the DNA within the company. Yeah. It doesn't happen overnight, and it often requires a lot of like, here's what we're doing, here's the impact we're making, here's the traction we're getting.
Yeah, so it's a lot of like, as far as measurement goes, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to tie your work to a dollar that you made. But while you're working on that, I think I have a background in influencer marketing back in the day. And so we would always look for engagement as a proxy for, a hard revenue number while you're working on the revenue. So, we look all the time at how many people are in Clue, what are they reading, where are they reading it, looking to expand that. So if there's a department where maybe we're not seeing as much engagement, we'll just say, hey, did you know this was over here? And really becoming thought leaders in the company, not just around, again, competitors. I jokingly referenced ChatGPT, but everybody's talking about AI now. We had a special Intel Digest 2 weeks ago just on the state of AI, and it wasn't like, I think we did look at where some of our competitors were going, but we were also just like, hey, this is also really cool stuff, and here's this, and here's what some people are thinking, because it's so new. And it was really just to help our product team more educated, and then just share that around the rest of the company so we could figure out what we want to do with that going forward.
That's cool. From an engagement standpoint, indicators in terms of like what stakeholders might want more, which ones are dropping off. Do you share engagement out to leadership at all to indicate like this is where there's appetite or this is what we're doing?
Yeah, we need to get more formal on that, but we check into it, monthly and quarterly, and then I have those discussions with my boss, our chief product officer.
And with Frankie as well, you mentioned like we're looking at this competitive revenue gap. How do you kind of look at that as a compete team right now, this competitive revenue gap and shrinking it?
We let our sales team lead with that a little bit. I mean, because part of it's the deals that are coming in. But as far as shrinking it, it's the main thing is getting into those, and we're seeing it happen. And I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, but getting into those conversations as early as possible. 8-9 months ago, we would get kind of down to that down selected stage, and it'd be like, hey, we're it's us and this other person. But now, if we like enter an RFP and we can get someone on the customer side to tell us, and we kind of know, we see the same people in the room most of the time, right? So you either get told who the competitors are, or they're like, they really care about this feature and this feature. And we're like, cool, it's this company and this company. So helping the sellers identify who those are by certain markers or certain features is helping a ton, because that way they're able to come in with stronger depositioning from the get-go without necessarily having to hear a competitor name.
When you mentioned like weaving compete into the DNA of the company, and what you mentioned there about your Intel Digest that was on the state of AI, it reminds me of an interesting point that Matt Koblenz made at one of our Compete Network roundtables was, this isn't competitor Intel, this is competitive Intel. And that is...
it's making you more competitive as opposed to intelligence. Yeah, I like that.
It's a distinct shift, because you can, and granted you do need to focus on competitor 1, 2, and 3, but market also, how are you going to be more competitive? How are Movista's CSMs going to be more competitive to successfully achieve renewals?
Yeah. So we, our product team, we kind of follow a methodology set up. There's a product marketing think tank institute. It's called the Pragmatic Institute. And they've just got a whole framework for how you do product marketing. One of they say it a lot, and it's one of the things they have in their very first course is to try to get away from inside out thinking as much as possible and move toward outside in thinking, meaning we all think we know what our ideal customer is thinking because they think like us, right? Surely we know what we're doing. But that creates sort of a very insular environment, and then you're wrong because you need to get out there and actually talk to people. Or, if your customers are working in a retail store, you should walk around with them and actually find out what their pain points are. For me, competitive moves us more toward outside in thinking, right? Especially when you start looking at true marketplace trends, and not just what your competitors are doing, like you said, but what do we need to make ourselves more competitive? And that's a whole lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'm hearing as well, which is partly the work you're doing, but you're also in a very fortunate position to have that CRO and CEO buy-in. That's a lot of work that you and your team have done. It's also great that you have leaders that are thinking that way. for those listeners that may not have built that credibility yet or are struggling to sort of prove that value to their leaders, do you have any advice or tips on how do you go about communicating with leadership about what Compete brings to the table? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, make-believe situation, but I think there are quite a few listeners, especially from the starting stage, that are like, okay, how do I even knock on that door?
I mean, we just did it by focusing on the fundamentals. When Frankie came in, so when we started our program, I was it, and then I was fortunate enough to be able to hire someone dedicated to it. And for the first 4, 5, 6 months, we built battle cards and extensive battle cards and refreshed them, and then once that's there, you can start pointing to it, right? Like your credibility is in the material you've collected and your knowledge. Like that's more than anything else. Frankie's a walking encyclopedia at this point. So having her in a meeting builds credibility. She doesn't have to go look at the platform to tell somebody what's going on now. And our challenge is to all now get as educated as she is, because all the information is there. But once you become an expert on the competitive space, and I think I mentioned to you earlier, and I said it in this, our new CEO has, spun up a couple of special projects, and she's doing them because she knows our space. And I think as you're building up to closing that competitive gap, it's proving that you know what you're talking about, and that just comes through a little bit of time. And it's not like every department in the company was inviting us in. We did what everybody does. We started with the sales team, because that's where you got to start. You got to win some deals. Move toward being more tightly integrated. The marketing team as just a more holistic go-to-market function between the three of us. And while we're in the product group, we actually didn't focus on them because make money first. And now we're slowly, as we're finding things, feeding them to them as far as new features and how we're seeing them designed in the marketplace and different types of engagement.
My last question. Tomorrow night.
Yeah, go ahead.
There may or may not be karaoke happening. Can you reveal, or is this going to be a surprise? Can you reveal where you're leaning in terms of your go-to song right now, or artist or genre?
Always some kind of hip hop. That way I don't have to worry about pitch. I will have to practice. It's been a little while. I don't think it's on the list. Like Nicki Minaj Super Bass is always one of my go-tos. So we'll see. There's a lot of singing in that one too, though. So I might have to find something a little different.
You could put your own creative spin on it.
We'll see.
On that note, Brad, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to have a killer time here in town.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.